So what can American voters and indeed the world expect if Donald Trump becomes US president again? An ultra-conservative think tank has drafted a detailed set of policies known as Project 2025 that it hopes he will enact. Mr. Trump has tried to distance himself from the project, but Democrat candidate Kamala Harris hopes to tie him to its more unpopular provisions.
You know, Project 2025, which I mean, can you believe they put that thing in writing?
It's dangerous, it's dastardly, and it's diabolical.
Democrats drawing attention to what they say are extreme elements in the conservative Heritage Foundation's policy playbook. It's a nearly 1,000-page wish list of what Republicans want to see happen if they take control of the White House in January 25. The project is divided into 4 main pillars: giving the president more power and installing loyal backers, defending America's borders and sovereignty, declaring the family as the focal point of American life, and more firmly rooting Christian ideology in U.S. society. Under the plan, parents would be given greater control over schools and their children's education. And diversity programs for minorities, including blacks and the LGBTQ community, would be rolled back. Publicly, Donald Trump has distanced himself from Project 2025. He posted on social media, "I have no idea who is behind it. I disagree with some of the things they're saying, and some of the things they're saying are absolutely ridiculous and abysmal." Democrats have pushed back, tying Trump to unpopular provisions like increased scrutiny of women's pregnancies.
He has been pretty clear in his behavior and his deeds. He will ban abortion nationwide. He will restrict access to birth control, put IVF treatments at risk, and force states to monitor women's pregnancies. And you don't have to take my word for it. Just Google Project 2025. Read the plans for yourself.
Meanwhile, a group called America First Policy Institute has emerged as another source of administration plans. The AFPI's agenda overlaps significantly with Project 2025. But the group has kept a low profile and has avoided taking some of the more extreme positions on social issues that Project 2025 takes. Instead, it contains detailed provisions on how to staff agencies and use executive power so the administration can do what it wants. That may be on purpose. There are numerous people involved in AFPI who are also Trump campaign and transition team insiders. Their agenda isn't a wish list, it's a program for action.
Let's look through this with Andrew Rudalevige, who is a professor of government at Bowdoin College in the US state of Maine. He studies American political institutions with an emphasis on the modern presidency, the executive branch, and inter-branch relations. He seems like just the man. Welcome to DW. Do you see anything sinister in these two groups compiling their wish lists of actions for the president that they support?
Well, it's not uncommon for think tanks and those associated with prior administrations or with a particular political party to come up with, it's often called a mandate for change or some, sort of a telephone book-sized list of things that they would like to see enacted by a new administration. Those affiliated with both parties have done that. What's different about this particular compilation, right, is that you do have this alliance of groups, people who have been affiliated with the first Trump administration and would very much like to see him expand his aggressiveness with regards to policy and executive power in the second. It's a very specific 900-page plus book if you're looking at Project 2025. The list of appointees that's been compiled by other sympathetic groups, also quite extensive. And so really it is a maybe more than for prior presidents, a sort of ready off-the-shelf blueprint for enacting quite a number of controversial provisions. Maybe they can't all be done on day one, but in the early days of a new administration.
So when Donald Trump distances himself from these groups publicly, do you believe him?
To be honest, not really. These are folks behind it who have been quite close or even worked in the first Trump administration. Stephen Miller, for example, at the America First Policy Institute, was a key lieutenant of Mr. Trump in the White House, very involved in immigration issues. Russ Vought was the president's budget director. It's been talked about. He's been talked about as someone having a role again, maybe as even White House chief of staff in the second administration. And so this is a closely collected group of conservative intellectuals who have been trying to push this program on really any president who will listen. But Mr. Trump is more open to that. And these are folks, again, who are likely to serve in the second term, if there is one.
Well, one of the more eye-catching points to these agendas, this notion of giving the president more power and installing loyal backers, how does that square with the current constitutional checks and balances? Could they be made under the current constitution?
Well, so the presidential power rests in part on the Constitution itself and partly on the powers that have been delegated to the president by Congress over time. Part of what these folks have been looking at are ways that the president could use existing law to implement a rather different agenda than we've seen to date, for example, in immigration or environment or with regards to reproductive rights. Looking back, for example, in immigration at laws dating back to the 18th century that have just never been taken off the books, in which, at least in prospect, could give the president authority to act in ways to deport. He's talking about millions of people who are in the United States. Obviously, there are logistical difficulties associated with that, but in terms of, again, the power granted to the presidency, that's pretty extensive. A lot of what has held prior presidents back isn't so much the law, but norms. For example, after the Watergate scandal in the 1970s, the Department of Justice has effectively run independently in some areas, especially with regards to criminal prosecution, from the White House. There are rules about contacts. The president's not supposed to lobby for a particular person to be investigated criminally. We saw erosion of that norm in the first Trump administration, but there are items, in Project 2025 that call for that to be removed entirely, for the Justice Department to be sort of a subordinate wing of the White House, and that could have some rather damaging implications. We see two efforts to wipe out civil servants and replace them with folks who would be vetted and approved by the White House in a lot of key policymaking areas. This would have the effect of, again, using existing law to implement proposals that are new and in some cases pretty extreme.
Okay, so all of this, if I can just sum up what you're saying, this sounds like is a wish list under current laws and the current state of the Constitution. What is different about it is just the applications. It's just that, as you say, the norms, they're thinking the unthinkable within the current framework. So where are voters in this? Do US citizens want...
Well, let me just...
by all means.
If I could answer that question maybe more pithily than I managed before, I would say, a lot of this is legal. People haven't pushed this envelope this far with regards to presidential authority. But you may remember the Supreme Court over the summer ruled that presidents can't be prosecuted criminally for official acts. Now, the definition of what is official and not is not entirely clear in that ruling, but it seems pretty certain that a president has been empowered, right, who wants to push the envelope of the law, has been empowered by this Supreme Court decision. And so I don't think we should expect timidity when it comes to trying to use it.
And so a brief word then on where voters might be in all this. Do US citizens want a super president? It's essentially, it sounds like a king.
Well, they say they don't. And of course, it will depend very much on their decisions about hundreds of members of Congress, as well as about their choice for the president. It seems pretty likely that Vice President Harris will win a majority of the popular vote. And if that number is over 50% of the total, under the American system with the Electoral College, Mr. Trump could still return to the White House if his votes come from the right places geographically. Folks remain skeptical, I think, about presidential power. But what we've seen recently is polarization that is associated with my president, quote unquote, being able to be a strong leader by using these executive authorities. But if a president of the other party does it, then it's tyranny. We don't, I think, have a lot of neutral sort of assessment of presidential power that's outside of that polarization. And that's worrying, because I think in the past we did have broader public and congressional checks against presidential overreach broadly.
Potential testing times ahead. A fascinating analysis, and we thank you for it, Professor Andrew Rudalevige from Bowdoin College. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.